Hello, my Lynn and Things family and friends. Welcome back to the channel, guys. You guys know what time it is? It's story time with Lynn again, guys. So happy Saturday. So good to have you back for another installment of our story. Just as I am, the Cicely Tyson story. I have truly been enjoying sharing this book with you guys, or not all of the book because I don't own the rights to the book, but sharing some very poignant parts of the book with you guys, and just having this dialogue with you guys, and just hearing some of you guys' thoughts and your memories that it's bringing back for, that you've had in your life, and some things that I've had in my life. It's really been an amazing ride so far. This book was interesting, guys, from beginning to end. I never had a dull moment reading this whole book, so I'm sure you guys are going to continue to enjoy each and every chapter. As you know, I've been doing 2 chapters per day. Per Saturday evening. So we're going to jump into, I believe we're at part 6 now. And I think we are on chapters 8 and 9 today. Yes, so 8 and 9 today, guys, is where we're going to start. But before we start reading, y'all already know what I have to do. We're going to get our candle of the evening, okay? Okay, guys, so tonight's candle is going to be my Palm Trees and Paradise. I do believe I won this from the wonderful Mrs. Viv, she is the Viv. She does have a YouTube channel, and I will put her in the description of this video, because I like for you guys to go over and give her some love on her channel as well. But yes, y'all, so this is it smells so good. I love the lid. Look at this lid, guys. How pretty is that? So it's supposed to smell like Palm Trees in Paradise, and it actually kind of does. It smells like paradise. So we're gonna light our candle. And for those of you who know, I do Dollar Tree hauls. Yes, I got the lighter at Dollar Tree. I know I haven't seen them in a while, but yeah. So we got our candle lit, and we're just going to set it to the side. And we're going to get started and jump into our reading. So remember, you can play me in the background, like if this is your quiet time, or if like you're, doing some housework or work, and you just kind of like an audio book type of vibe going on. Definitely do that. Or if you would like to just watch, however you'd like to enjoy this story time with me, please feel free to do so. Okay, guys, so we are on chapter 8, and chapter 8 is called Divinely Guided. I'm a firm believer in divine guidance, she says. Above all, I am God's child, cradled in his unfailing arms, guided by his infinite wisdom. Everything that is happening in my life is unfolding exactly as God has intended. There are no coincidences. Rather, there is a loving Savior who holds my future as securely as he does my life. And at every juncture, he is whispering his will, showing me the way. In 1954, the year I turned 30, I followed the Father's voice down a path that both thrilled and unnerved me. Much on the planet had changed by then. The winter after I had Joan, the Second World War raged on overseas, with Allied forces eventually knocking the opposition to its knees during the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943. That same year, the Tuskegee Airmen, the all-black group of pilots who defied Air Force leaders' belief that blacks were intellectually incapable of becoming aviators, bravely flew their first combat mission in Italy. Here in the United States during that era, the color line showed the slightest sign of a fading in 1944. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., then the pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church, became the first black New York elected to Congress, standing tall for his Harlem community in the House of Representatives. Then, in 1947, Jackie Robinson scored a home run for his history when he joined the Brooklyn Dodgers as the first black athlete to play in Major League Baseball, y'all. Full equality for our folks was still way off in the distance, but if you squinted real hard, you could see it taking shape. My family had likewise shifted. After Emily finished high school, she kept one toe under the roof of our mother and another out on the town with suitors. Her godmother, Miss Cole, eventually introduced her to Reginald, a young man whose family hailed from Nevis. One afternoon when Reggie stopped in to see Miss Cole's niece, whom he had taken out on a few times, he spotted Emily's picture on the wall. "Who is this young lady?" he asks. "Oh, that's my goddaughter, Emily Tyson," she said proudly. Noting his salivation, Miss Cole arranged for the two to meet, and I was there on the evening of Reggie's visit. Knock, knock, knock. "Who is it?" I called out, grinning from across the living room at Mom and Emily, who already knew, courtesy of Miss Cole, that Miss Reggie was coming calling. "It is I, Reginald," he announced in his proper put-on-the-show English. I opened the door and he strode in, shoulders all squared, beret cocked to the left. Lord have mercy. It was the funniest sight. It took all my might to squelch a snicker. Next thing I knew, Miss Cole's niece had gone the way of all flesh as Emily. The charmer that our father had been swept in and took over Reginald's heart. They courted for a year or so, and then they married. I served as Emily's maid of honor, as well as the resident hairdresser who styled the mains of the entire wedding party. I also designed the bridesmaids' gowns. As Reggie and my sister spoke their promises before a congregation of more than 100, my mother's countenance radiated joy. She had her fairy tale. At last, she had a daughter who done things the right way. Her way. No one in our family would have predicted that Emily, with her fresh self, would turn out to be the good daughter, the wholesome one, the girl who married before bringing my mother her grandbabies in God's time. There at the altar, by her side, I stood balancing my sister's bouquet, forcing a smile for her sake while shoving down my sadness. However naive I had been in becoming a teenage mother, however ill-equipped Mom's silence had ensured I was, however enraptured I felt by the miracle of Joan, a part of me still mourned falling short of my mother's great hope for me. My spirit longed to give her the storybook ending she had craved, the fantasy Emily was now handing to her. We are our mother's children, every one of us. Joan sprouted up fast. In those years, I marked time by how well my darling grew. Her care became my singular priority, my all-consuming point of reference. Blurry-eyed and breathless, I sprinted from one day break to the next, scrambling to keep the paychecks coming and Joan's tuition covered. During back-to-back shifts at various clerical jobs, I kept my fingertips glued to a typewriter, click-clacking my way to solvency. Late every evening, I'd then crawl my way back to my aunt's place and tiptoe into Joan's bedroom, sitting at her side, witnessing her lost in her dream world, watching her chest rise and fall. Before turning in myself, I lay out Joan's clothes and prepare her lunch for the next day. Such was my life's tempo until the year Joan was 9, the year when my dear aunt craved a respite and I, reluctant yet clear that I needed consistent child care, returned to my mom's place and purview. I truly did not want to move back in with my mother, and yet Heavenly Father, in His omniscience, obviously saw fit to keeping us drawn together. Perhaps because He knew I had some spiritual business to complete. When you ask God for something, when you ask Him for strength, as I do daily, He doesn't usually just drop it from the sky. He often answers by placing you in a circumstance that requires you to build fortitude while relying solely on Him. Motherhood had thrust me into adulthood prematurely, and yet emotionally, even by my late 20s, I was still a child in some ways, still a girl guided by the rise and fall of my mother's brow, by her approval and her displeasure. While living with my aunt, I towered in my sense of autonomy, wrapped myself tight in the cloak of my position as an independent parent. But back in my mother's apartment, I found myself regressing into the voicelessness of my earlier years, cowering beneath the reign of the woman who'd always steered me. By voiceless, I do not mean mute. I bickered weekly with my mother, railed against her rule more than I dared to during childhood. I see now that I wasn't fighting against her, but for myself. Defying her voice was my way of making space for my own, however feeble and uncertain. At the heart of our disputes lived my struggle for womanhood, my yearning to trust God's whispers and tune out all others. A year after I had been with my mother, the father's whisper crescended into a shout. After work, late one evening, I returned home to find Joan out in the street in the front of the apartment, hopscotching with another girl from the block. I peered around. On one shadowy corner sat a row of old men, slamming down dominoes on a fold-up table and swigging beer. Across from there, a group of women balanced themselves on crates, cackling and carrying on as a radio blared. I then looked up. There, near the top floor of our building, my mother sat on a ledge of her apartment window sill, gazing down at the scene. I glanced at my watch. 10 p.m. What on earth is my child still doing up? I approached Joan, who skipped over into my arms when she spotted me. What are you doing out here at this hour? I asked. She smiled, playing. She said, oblivious to the worry on my face. Do you know what time it is? I said. You gotta go to school in the morning. Upstairs, my mother had no reasonable explanation for why she'd allowed Joan to linger in the streets. Mom, why is this baby outdoors so late? I asked, my voice rising by the syllable. She shrugged. Don't come in here fussing, she snapped. I had my eye on that girl all evening. I could see her from where I was sitting. Joan was 10 at the time. When I was that age, the earth would have had to topple off its axis for my mother to allow me outdoors after dark. What was she thinking? I don't know. The next morning, I began researching boarding schools. With the 50 and 60-hour work weeks I was clocking, I knew I could not be there for my daughter in the way that I wanted to be, the way countless working mothers long to be. And yet, if I was going to partner with others in caring for Joan, I had to be sure I could trust the palms I placed her in. When you don't know what to do, you do what you know. And all my life, I'd been taught to trust those guided by the same God who had led me. That is why when my eyes fell on an advertisement for a Christian boarding school in upstate New York, I immediately became interested. Upon calling, I learned that the school was run by a minister and his wife, a couple who had once presided over a church in Harlem. The next week, I traveled to meet the couple. I toured the middle school campus, I talked with some of the members and teachers, students, and I inspected the all-girl dormitories. My spirit said yes. But you can never be too careful when it comes to your child, your treasure, which is why weeks later I visited again to be sure all was in order. I returned home carrying both a greater sense of certainty that this was the right place for Joan and a financial arrangement with the school that put the cost within reach for me. When I revealed my plan to my mother with nary a stutter as I spoke, she of course protested. Why is you taking that child up there? She pressed. I stared at her but felt no urge to explain, no desire to reveal how her behavior had prompted my choice. I knew what I had to do, and nothing she could say would unbutton my resolve. I would stay on with my mother and continue working in the city, I told her, but Joan's care could not be compromised. That was the fall of 1953. At the start of my daughter's 5th grade year, I packed up her belongings and took her on a train upstate. And yet, you know with the same immutable assurance that rose up in me on the day that I walked away from my marriage, by all outward appearances, there was a decision to be made, a lever to be pulled, stay or go. But inwardly, the only true choice for me was onward. I understood that to my core, knew it with the same certainty I'd once known our neighbor's apartment would go up in flames. Knew it as surely as I know there is a creator. And yet the truth, however irrefutable it is, does not spare its pursuer the accompanying anguish. On that fall afternoon, when I waved goodbye to my child on that red and orange leaves above us, lowering their heads in lament, every part of me ached. I kept my promise to visit frequently in the following months. I traveled north any time I could yank my fingers away from my typewriter. I also brought Joan home for spring break and holidays and sometimes on the weekends. I missed her so much I knew I would, multiplied by far more than that. Whenever Joan was in the city with me, I whisked my angel around town, loading up on shopping bags with more dresses and shoes and coats than my checking account could hold. Our eventual partings, our eyelids brimming with sadness and adoration. And that, guys, is chapter 8. So we're going to take just a little break before we go into chapter 9. So go ahead if you need to go and grab a drink or anything you might have to do, and I'll be right back with chapter 9. Okay, guys, welcome back. We at chapter 9, and the title is Shoulder Taps. Show me a West Indian woman, and I'll show you an enterpriser holding down 3 jobs. Years before the arts swept me up in their gale winds, I strung together a living by adding multiple side gigs to my main one. I wielded my hot comb all over the 5 boroughs, leaving a trail of charred scalps in my wake. After my primary job at the law firm was finished each day, I staggered over to my second gig, what was then known as a typing pool, a group of work-for-hire secretaries who transcribed shorthand notes for male executives who did not have their own administrative staffs. I worked nights. Aside from the graveyard shift, I rounded up scores of other jobs over the years. One summer, I worked as a transcriptionist for the Save the Children. The next, I took a spot on the assembly line of a nail factory. Toward the end of the war, I was hired as a secretary inside the Navy purchasing office, a sprawling edifice at 90 Church Street. That job put a spring in my father's gait. After you finish high school, Dad would often tell me when I was younger, I want you to go work in one of those tall buildings downtown. Mind you, he did not care what position I held. My mere presence in a soaring structure, one representing upward mobility, was accomplishment enough for him. In his mind, earning a living in a skyscraper where few blacks were ever spotted meant I had made it. That his offspring had fared better than he could have when he arrived in America, empty-handed and hopeful. On the day that I landed the job, I called him. Well, Dad, I said, you got your wish. I'm in one of those tall buildings downtown. That week, he took the number 6 train south to see it for himself. Arm in arm, the two of us stood together on the sidewalk, gazing up in awe. He looked over at me, then skyward again, then back at me. Congratulations, String Bean, he said, planting a kiss on my cheek as he beamed. The year Joan went to boarding school, I renewed my search for temporary gigs I could fit around my position at the law firm. In those days, everyone at the employment office of the Urban League in Harlem knew me by name. I was in that office more than I was in my mother's apartment. One afternoon, I pranced in, my short hair freshly pressed and precisely styled. Audrey Hepburn, with her pixie cut and delicate pearl earrings, was the golden girl to mimic in that era. And my family, noting my take on the icon's cut, began calling me the Black Audrey. Even strangers would often proclaim, "You know you look just like Audrey Hepburn." Not quite, but I embraced the compliment. "What kind of position are you looking for?" asked the young woman I hadn't met yet. "Anything," I said. "How fast can you type?" she asked. "Over 100 words a minute," I said. She nodded approvingly, picked up the receiver on her phone, and dialed one of her contacts. Afterwards, she scribbled something on a sheet of paper and handed it to me. "Go here," she says. I eyed the 3 words at the top of the paper. American Red Cross, with the address in Midtown near 38th and Lexington scrawled beneath. That afternoon, I was hired as a fill-in secretary to the vice president, Miss Rubin. The part-time position, which involved typing case histories for the organization, eventually morphed into a full-time job. It also became the vehicle for God's strong tap on my shoulder. I was given a new case history to transcribe, one involving a black wife and mother. In her consultation with my supervisor, the woman confided that her husband was having sex with their 8-year-old daughter. When I got to that line, I stopped typing. I picked up the paper, rereading and praying that I had seen that wrong. I hadn't, sadly. Why didn't you report him? Miss Rubin had asked the mother. Her answer still sends a shiver through me. I was afraid he would lose his job, she said. I'll tell you, I was no good for the rest of the week. Your child is being molested by her father, and you won't go to the authorities because you're scared he'll be fired? It sickened me to my core. It also served as a painful reminder of what it meant, and still often means, to be black in this country. So precarious has our financial position been that too many of us have been forced to choose between economic security and safety for our children. Even now, all these years later, recalling that transcript makes me want to retch. No way could I, year after year, bear witness to such agony, memorializing heartache with ink-stained iron keystrokes. After typing up the full case that afternoon, I pushed myself back from the desk and made another major proclamation. I'm sure God didn't put me on the face of this earth to bang a typewriter for the rest of my life. I said, there is something else for me to do. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna find it. From my lips to God's ears, or as I see it now, the other way around. The next week, I received another love note from heaven. During my lunchtime, I shot out of the office and headed straight for nearby Lord and Taylor. Oh, how I loved that department store. During the holidays, its windows along Fifth Avenue featured the most breathtaking Christmas displays, lavish and sparkling, casting a spell and glow over the entire block. Admirers traveled from all parts of the globe just to stand before those windows in all their twinkling glory. I frankly had little business in a store, given what I earned, but that never stopped me from roaming the aisles, dreaming about a new pocketbook or a scarf for Joan. It broke my heart when decades later in 2019 the store closed its doors after a century in business. Anyway, on that day, I flounced out the shop, feeling attractive in my wraparound pinstripe dress and patent leather pumps, eager for my midday routine. What happened next was anything but. Just as I was rounding the corner onto Fifth Avenue, a black man decked out in a business suit and scarlet bow tie tapped me on the shoulder. I swiveled around. "Excuse me, miss," he said. "Are you a model?" "No," I said, searching his face for where this was going. "Well, if you aren't," he said, "you should be." I blushed, not sure how to respond. I never saw myself as beautiful. My first crush, Horace, had convinced me I was somewhat cute, at least in his eyes. But beyond that, I thought I was plain. When it came to appearance, what I felt certain about was my ability to dress, thanks to the elite fashion education afforded to me by my parents, known in our church as Mr. and Mrs. Bo Brummel. Stylish? Yes. Darling, and please pass me my mink stole. Slender? Absolutely. But beautiful? That label did not live at the heart of my self-identity. "How do you go about becoming a model?" I asked him. "You connect with an agent and you go to modeling school," he explained. "Once you finish your training, the agent sends you out on interview jobs." He paused and looked at me up and down as if to be sure his original assessment had been accurate. "You really should give it a shot," he said. I smiled, politely thanked him, and went on about my way to the store. I initially disregarded the stranger's comments. Me, a model? The idea seemed outlandish, given that I was almost 30 years old, and presumably well past a model's prime time. And yet our conversation curled up in my spirit, the way certain notions do when they're set on residing permanently. And right alongside that, was the feeling I'd been grappling with, the sense that my work as a secretary was not the end of the career road for me, but rather a milestone along our alternate route. So acute was this feeling that one week after that businessman stopped me on the sidewalk, I pulled out the yellow pages. I flipped to the section labeled modeling schools, and I scanned the list of agencies. All of them, based on the names and locations, seemed headed by white folks. They're not going to take me for no modeling job anyhow, I thought. I slammed the book shut. Yet I continued to kind of ponder the idea, even mentioning it to my longtime friend Thelma Jack. The two of us had met years earlier during our teen years at a summer camp upstate. Thelma's face lit up when I told her that what the man had proposed. You know, there's a woman in Harlem who runs a modeling school, she tells me. Her name is Barbara Watson. She's the daughter of Judge Watson, as in James S. Watson, the first black judge elected to New York City, and husband to Violet Lopez Watson, a founding member along with Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune of the National Council of Negro Women. In 1946, Barbara May Watson, the eldest of four, founded the first agency for African American models. Emboldened by my friend's encouragement and armed with this fresh data, I called the school. Miss Watson herself answered. I stammered my way through a conversation, and she saved me from my bluster with a concluding request. Why don't you come in for an interview? So in my inaugural meeting with Miss Watson, I of course fished out the finest powder blue cotton dress, one gathered at the waist with a row of glistening gold buttons stretching down to its left side. I completed the look with black suede pumps and silk thigh-high stockings, minus garters. Like many working class West Indian women, I secured each stocking with a top knot enough to cut off one's circulation. I was blessed to even have silk nylons. During the war, silk and other commodities had run in short supply, and as a result, nylon repair shops sprang up. My spot was a little cleaner's in a basement around the corner from the Red Cross. Before my interview, I took my nylons there, and child, once they fixed my 2 runs for 5 cents each, those stockings looked brand new. People then took such pride in their workmanship. On the day I stepped my suede toe over Miss Watson's threshold, I strutted in like I was working a Paris runway. She scanned my outfit, smiled, and offered me a seat. So, have you done any modeling at all, Miss Cicely? She asked. No, ma'am, I have not, I said, carefully pronouncing each word. I see, she said. She then asked me a few questions about my background, as well as how I'd learned about the agency. I gave her the short story as she jotted down some notes on an intake form. Well, she finally said, leaning back in her seat and laying down her pen, what would you think about having some photos taken? I nodded. That'll be fine. I mean, yes, miss, I said, trying to contain my glee. Excellent, she says, standing up to show me out to the lobby. And in the meantime, I hope you'll sign up for one of our courses. Nearly before she completed that sentence, honey, I had enrolled that evening in the evening course, which included about 25 women, spanned several weeks. Miss Watson taught us the fundamentals of charm and poise, how to perfect our postures, how to hold our bodies as we glided across a room with effortless, supple movement, how to pose for photographs, how to pivot and curtsy and smile. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, I wasn't runway material, so I kept my ears widest for the catalog and magazine model training. Meanwhile, I began work on my portfolio. I arranged for a photographer to take 3 images of me: a headshot in a navy suit, a body shot in a baby blue dress, and a swim shot in a teal 2-piece suit. The latter was quite modest, nothing like today's dental floss bikinis that leave one's derriere hanging out. If I had been required to don such a suit, this church girl would have ended her modeling career before it even began. But I was comfortable in my portfolio bikini, one cut just below the navel and one just like those I wore to the beach. Once I'd received the photos, I scheduled a session with Miss Watson to show her the spread. Her business partner, Mildred Smith, who also served as editor of Our World magazine, a lifestyle publication catering to black women, attended the meeting. The two of them looked at my photos, closely studying each. Neither of them said a word. "Can you please give us a few moments to speak?" Miss Watson finally said. "Yes, of course," I said, my heart hammering away in my chest. The women then stepped off to the side and out of my earshot. Likely so they could decide how to run me out of that office, I feared. After what felt like hours, but was probably about 13 minutes or so, they turned to me. "So how many copies did you have made of each of your photos?" Miss Watson asked. "Well, I didn't know what you would expect," I said, "so I just got a few." "Well," she said, "we'd like to order a few hundred more on your behalf." I gulped. "Really?" I said, my eyes widening. "Yes, really," she said, smiling. While I decided I was about to be banished from modeling schools the world over, the women had been discussing my strategic launch, how to saturate the market with my photos. In my class of potential models, only two were ultimately chosen. I, daughter of a housekeeper, child of the Most High, was astoundingly one of them. Speaking of shut eye, I got little of it. I pecked my way 9 to 5 on weekdays, through my work at the Red Cross before making my evening rounds with portfolios spilling from my satchel. Then after 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift in the secretarial sweatshop 2 nights a week, I dashed home with just enough time to shower, brush my teeth, and limp back out the door. From the start, I viewed modeling for what it was, a business, an income generator. The fact that I saw it as such is why the bashfulness of my youth naturally fell away. Because believe me, I have never been shy about making money. The most potent antidote to reticence is survival. The gigs at first trickled in, and then they flooded. In the beginning, I modeled anything and everything. Shoes and handbags and hats and swimsuits, even wigs for the local hair salons. Those entry-level jobs put me on the map in the modeling community. And before long, I was landing covers and spreads for major magazines such as Ebony, Jet, and of course, the publication where Miss Mildred Smith worked, Our World. It was there, one afternoon in early 1955, when God breathed in my direction yet again. On my way out of a meeting with Miss Smith, I spotted a woman in the waiting room. As I passed, she gave me the once-over, and I, thinking nothing of it, nodded courteously and hurried back to the Red Cross. I didn't know it at the time, but that woman happened to be Evelyn Davis, an actress. When Evelyn went in to see Miss Smith, she asked her, "Who is that young lady who just sashayed out of here?" "She's a model working with Barbara Watson," she says. "Why do you ask?" "Because I just come from an interview for a movie," she says, "and they're looking for a young lady who looks just like her to play the lead." I hadn't been back at my desk for more than 3 minutes when my phone rang. "I think I got you a movie," says Miss Smith, hardly breathing between each word. "A movie?" I said. "What is you talking about, a movie?" She explained that Evelyn had mentioned and then concluded with, "And can you believe you look just like the young lady they are looking for? Evelyn can arrange for you to meet the director." I paused and glanced around, concerned that my supervisor would overhear me on the phone. "Listen," I say, "I don't know anything about making no movie, and I'm not going any place to make a fool of myself." Click. I have been to see one film during my lifetime, and as you know, the experience scared the crap out of me. A movie? No way was I going to get involved with the film business. But God clearly saw it another way, and he sent Miss Smith to deliver his opposing viewpoint. The next morning, she called me again, begging me to reconsider. "Why don't you just go over and meet the director?" she kept saying. I declined. Finally, after she rang me 3 days in a row, I almost burst a blood vessel. "Look, do me a favor," I said, trying to and failing to whisper. "You're gonna make me lose my job. Please don't call me anymore." Then tell me that you will go see this man after you get off work today, she urged. Yes, 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 I said, rushing her off the phone. Just as I was about to click down the receiver, she said, but wait, you don't even know where I'm sending you. Well, then you better talk fast, I told her. She gave me the address, an office down in Carnegie Hall. The director's name was Warren Coleman. He became a Broadway fixture throughout the 1930s and 40s, which was long enough for him to recognize how black artists were mistreated, how our creative brilliance was overshadowed by our social rank, how the same white audience members who applauded black performers publicly would not allow them to scoot up to them in private dinner tables. Those realities had prompted him to form his own production company and create films reflecting African American life in all its resplendent intricacy. He was just beginning work on his first independent movie, The Spectrum, a film about color consciousness in the black community. As he spoke, I feigned interest, nodding at the appropriate junctures, the whole time thinking, this is nonsense. I'm not going to be no actress. How much do you know about acting? Warren asked me. Nothing at all, I said. Well, I had the script of the film right here, he says. He rummaged through a stack of papers and notebooks on his desk and handed me a spiral-bound book. Why don't you take this home and read it? I flipped through it just to be polite. I had never done anything like this, I told him. I just don't think I'm the right one. But I appreciate your time. I then sat the book on the desk, picked up my pocketbook, and walked toward the door. No, wait a minute, wait, he says, retrieving the script and following me toward the entrance. I really want you to take this script with you. Can you just read it and see what you think? Will you do that? I looked back at him. I suppose, I said. With what harm could come of it? I guess I could have a look. Excellent, he says, giving me the book. I'll give you a call in a couple of weeks, okay? I carried the script home and tossed it into my bedside drawer. I prefer humiliation private. Thank you very much. And as ambitious as I was to earn money, I had no interest in making a public spectacle of myself. I promptly forgot about the script until a couple of days later when I was searching in that same drawer for a hairbrush. My eyes fell on the book cover. I pulled it out, read the first page. An hour later, I was still sitting there reading. The story gripped me. Autumn, the female lead, and a blossoming writer, came to New York with aspiration in her eyes, hoping to sell an article she had penned. She was my dark complexion. The magazine editor she approached was light-skinned, as was the man she eventually fell in love with. The two began a courtship, and the man's mother, determined that her son maintain the privilege of their honey-tinged heritage, protested mightily. If you marry her, she warned, you'll destroy your career. I found the plot captivating, yet I still could not see myself in it, especially as the lead. If Warren succeeded in making the film, I told myself, I'd be the first to line up at the cinema to see it, who played in it, and what this whole acting thing was about. And yet, much as I had no vision of myself as Autumn, my curiosity had been awakened. Another tap, another whisper from on high. At the 2 weeks to the day, Warren rang me. I'd like you to come to the studio and meet someone, he said. Cicely, I want you to read Autumn, and Hal will read his part. I paused, slowly reaching into my bag and pulled out the script. The reading flowed seamlessly. Our voices fit together naturally, weaving and swaying in step as if we had been rehearsing with one another for weeks. Magic operates as such. When a pivot is predestined on the stone tablet of your life story, there is often an inexplicable ease to it. It feels otherworldly, from an almighty source beyond your frail humanity. That is how reading that scene felt to me. Supernatural. When I completed my final lines and looked up, Warren was staring at me and grinning. So, do you want to be an actress, Cicely? He said. Seems to me you already are. I lowered the script, looked down at the floor, giving doubt a chance to resurface. I don't know anything about making no movie, I told him. Well, he said, laughing and sidestepped in my reluctance. I guess you'll find out. Warren asked whether he could call me again. The part of my spirit that understood the moment's transcendence, the power of the precipice I was dancing along, agreed. Even when humans are busy shaking our heads no, shoving down our fears and shoving off our blessings, the Father has a way of propelling us forward, of moving us toward His way. Warren indeed called and pleaded with me to play Autumn, only to be met with another round of my misgivings. And just as Miss Smith had, he called a second time, refusing to be shunned. By his third call, I had finally aligned with the will of the Father. I told Warren yes. And he not only persuaded me to play the role, he insisted that he manage me. How old are you? He asked early on. 30, I told him. He gazed at me incredulously. Really? He said. I nodded. Well, you certainly don't look it, he said. You could pass for 10 years younger, my dear, and from now on, you should claim to be. Nature has bestowed black people with one of its most prized gifts, melanin. And in a society where we are seldom allowed an advantage, Warren understood the importance of utilizing mine. 6 decades would go by before I let the public in on what was frankly never any of their business. It was Warren who introduced me to the flurry and hustle and bustle of New York theater, and in many ways to life beyond the walls of the church world I had been reared in. Given his long-standing success on Broadway, he had access which he leveraged to offer me a crash course in both craft and sophistication. I became fast friends with affable Diana Sands, another young actress in the Spectrum, and Warren whisked us from one play and a concert to the next, where we met performers backstage, soaking in the chaos and the costumes and the color from behind the curtain, artistry and antics. Afterward, he exposed us to some of the city's finest cuisines. In the rice and plantains existence of my youth, escargot absolutely had no place. Into the wee hours of the morning, over such purported delicacies, we talked scripting and technique and plot. I had no idea what I was gibbering about, of course, but Warren insisted that I had potential. You got a natural talent, he assured me. I smiled and think, what does that even mean? A raw slab of marble also has so-called potential, but only when the sculptor chips away at it, piece by piece, does a face emerge. Raw talent does not a fine actor make, which is why, even as I zealously rehearsed with Hal, I prioritized my modeling work. Before I knew it, I was earning enough money to finally leave the Red Cross, 3 decades shy of a gilded watch, and feeling grateful for the stepping stone that the job had served for me. From the start, I had told my mother about my modeling work, and surprisingly, she voiced no objections, especially after she began spotting me in the center spreads of the magazines that she read. She soaked it up. She had a famous daughter, child, one with accomplishments worth displaying, one she could now be proud of again after a season of a lowered head. My work qualified not as an ungodly undertaking, but as a point of family and community pride. But the same could not be said of her perspective on my film work, which I hid from her. One night, Warren asked me, "Have you told your mother about the movie?" I shook my head. She would not approve, I said. "Well, maybe I should talk to her," he offered. "That's not a good idea," I shot back. "I would rather her not even know right now." My work on the Spectrum was easy to conceal. Mom was used to me coming and going at all times of day and night, so that did not raise any suspicion. But things changed soon after my conversation with Warren. Late one evening, after Warren and I had seen a mesmerizing production of My Fair Lady at the Mark Hellinger Theater, he walked me home. My mother happened to be sitting at her window, looking down and watching the world go by like the old folks do often. She spotted Warren and me. When I got upstairs to the apartment, the Grand Inquisition commenced. "Who was that man you were with?" she asked. "He's a producer, Mom," I said. "He's doing a movie, and he would like me to be part of it." I stopped short of revealing that I had been rehearsing for months. "You can't do that," she told me. "Why?" I said. You're going to leave this good job you have for this darn foolishness, she said, referring to my typing pool and modeling work. I didn't say I was leaving anything, I retorted. I just said I was going to do a movie. She stared at me for a long moment. Well, you can't stay here and do that, she said. Her statement jarred me so, echoed through me, that I could not even look at her. Without a word, I rose from the couch, disappeared into my bedroom. There was no sense in arguing with my mother. What she was forbidding me to do, I was already headlong into doing, with no intention of reversing course. God himself had pointed my suede pumps in this new direction. I've come to believe that, even as I was still making sense of the film industry and wondering whether I had any place in it. And while I'd known instinctively this disagreement with my mother had been postponable, I also realized it was inevitable. I dared to enter the den of iniquity, Lucifer's workshop as my mom saw it. Anything to do with entertainment or theater was pure sin, the devil's territory, an express train to Hades. My apparent transgression, as well as the temerity I'd shown in mentioning it within my mother's earshot, was grounds enough for her to promptly dismiss me. The next day I called Thelma Jack. She was working for the telephone company and had her own place downtown at 112 East 7th Street. It had 2 bedrooms. May I come live with you? I asked her after explaining my situation. She enthusiastically agreed, eager not only to share her apartment, but also to have pay half the rent. I'd have my own private space there, one large enough to have Joan with me during her school breaks, another upside that made Thelma and the consummate roommate candidate. She and I wore the same dress size, a 4. That was important to me because in between rehearsing and modeling, I was still constantly interviewing for clerical temp jobs. When I'd go out on interviews, I could borrow Thelma's dresses, and that I did. When I left my mother's apartment, we did not speak for nearly a year. We did not see each other for almost 2. As devastated as I was by her choice, as deeply as her words had sliced through me, I knew she had made the only decision she felt she could. It was her way of loving me, of trying to redirect my path and shift my affections away from the strivings of this world and back toward the kingdom of heaven. I tell you, boy, God certainly kept me in his sight line. I couldn't have dreamed up a script more compelling than the one that played out for me during those years. Who just happens to be approached on the street by a total stranger, only to have the man propose modeling, only to have that modeling work become a footbridge to the stage. To some, this might look like happenstance, a sequence of coincidences, a string of disconnected flukes. As I see it, my tide shift, my sharp turnaround, had the Savior's handprints all over it. His sovereignty was apparent to me. It still is. The same master who holds the firmaments in the crease of his palms, he commands oceans to recede, who maintains humanity's entire existence with the mist of his breath. That God, the source of time itself, the creator of all life, has forever been directing mine. Okay, guys, that is all of chapter 9. Wow, that was really, really great. Thank you guys so much for coming in yet again, hearing our next installment. Like I said, I think this is part 6. Again, please feel free to leave your comments. Anything that you'd like to mention, what piqued your interest. Is there something that gave you another memory from your own life? I am always very interested in hearing you guys' commentary. And yeah, if you haven't already, I'm sorry, y'all. I'm thinking so many words in my mind. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so. I would love to have you. I do usually do Dollar Tree haul, so I have seen that I have been getting some new subbies. So I do want to welcome in all the new subbies. So usually I am doing Dollar Tree hauls, Dollar Tree reviews. I do like Ray Dunn and DIYs and things like that. That's why my name is Lynn and Things, because I do a lot of things here on my channel. This is just one of the new segments on my channel where I do story time with Lynn, and I'm sharing this book, which I think is phenomenal. So please go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Please hit that like. That really does help the channel, and it does help YouTube know that, hey, we're interested in this content and I can be more shared out. Thanks, guys. Until our next Saturday for story time. Enjoy your night.